Committee on Behavioral Health to order. And we have some new members. So let's start with introduction. Let's start down there.
So I'm Representative John Lively, House District 12 from Springfield, and I'm pleased to be a new member of this committee.
Welcome.
I'm Dwayne, Southern Oregon. Glad to be here.
Are we doing a full introduction of the whole committee? Hi, my name is Representative Tiffany Mitchell. I represent District 32, which spans all of Clatsop County down to about 3rd Street in Tillamook City, and then rural West Washington County, Banks and Gaston.
Is it administrator?
Oliver Droppers, committee staff.
I'm Mitch Greenlick, House District 33. I'm pleased to be chair of the new Committee on Behavioral Health.
I'm Representative Cedric Hayden. I come from House District 7, which is Lane and Douglas County. It's a pleasure to have new members, Representative Stark for the record, and Lively for those that are not here, so we know who you are. And I serve as vice chair and pleased to be part of the behavioral health, the new behavioral health committee, which I think is very important for Oregon.
Good morning, Raquel Moore Green, representative to House District 19, South Salem and Turner. South Salem, Turner, and Almsville. There we go. Thank you.
That's it.
Danielle?
I'm Danielle Ross, committee assistant.
You.
Yeah, Representative Salinas.
Down on the
I'm
diet.
here.
Where is she?
You were hiding from me. I can't see anything.
I know. Good morning. I'm State Representative Andrea Salinas, and I too am happy to be working with all of you on this work.
I'm going to open an organizational meeting for the purpose of adopting committee rules. Mr. Vice Chair, you got a motion?
Chair Greenlick, I move to adopt the proposed committee rules dated 2/4/2020.
Dr. Hayden moves we adopt the committee rule. Is there any discussion? Is there any objection? So moved. I'm going to open up a public hearing on both House Bill 4031 and House Bill 4082. We'll take them together so we can meet people's otherwise important schedule. What do we have with these two bills?
Mr. Chair, we have House Bill 4031, which removes the exemption of the requirement for licensure for people providing certain counseling services, directs the Oregon Health Authority to assess the future supply and demand of behavioral health professionals in Oregon, and modifies behavioral health statutory terms with person-first language. House Bill 4082 will establish a joint legislative commission to design a future integrated behavioral health system in Oregon, and we have Representative Salinas to open up the public hearing on House Bill 4031.
Let's go.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Andrea Salinas. I'm the state representative for House District 38, Lake Oswego and Southwest Portland. So first, I want to just provide some relief to those in the room who are here to oppose House Bill 4031 due to Section 1. I've asked LC to draft an amendment that will remove Section 1. And the provision would have removed the exemption of individuals who lack the required education from the requirement to be licensed in order to practice professional counseling and marriage and family therapy. I believe that this exemption exposes unwitting consumers, and I've actually heard from constituents all around the state that have had problem with damage and harm from unlicensed counselors, and it hamstrings the state's ability to hold these practitioners accountable for any harm they may have caused. Removal of this section, though, does not indicate my willingness to allow unlicensed therapists from practicing professional counseling, but it does acknowledge that the bill may have unintended consequences of capturing more therapists than intended, and under this short session timeline, we don't really have time to address how we should proceed. So I plan to utilize the work of the Board of Psychology to bring a work group together to continue to work on this in the interim. So I do plan to bring back a solution in 2021. I've also asked LC to draft an amendment to remove Section 3, the person first language, and not because I don't think person first language is not important, but really just to make the bill simpler for purposes of my main goal to achieve my top priority and my major concern this session, which I believe is the healthcare, behavioral healthcare workforce piece. And that is in Section 2, in which I've also asked for some tweaks to this piece. The legislature receives stakeholder agency and legislative requests for one-off behavioral health investments. I think Representative Hayden and I talk about this frequently, without a clear understanding of where these investments will take us. We have no clear narrative upon which to base new and ongoing requests for policy changes and funding priorities. And I think Representative Stark probably brought a very good bill forward last year, and we ultimately did not fund it for a pilot project, but it's things like that that we have to know how it fits into the larger picture. And so year after year, these investments roll up with little measure of return, as has been seen with our workforce of nurses and housing agenda. Defining an end goal can be a productive tool to align investments, revise policies, deliver measurable outcomes, and mobilize stakeholders toward a common goal. I've asked LC to revise Section 2 just a little bit, and I hope to have the amendment back soon. I'm asking OHA to hire a consultant to bring back a report with very specific goals around the behavioral health workforce. First, I believe we need an inventory of the work that's already taking place. The report should focus on packaging OHA's existing work, previously contracted studies, as we all know there's been a ton of them, and relevant local and national data into an end goal for Oregon's behavioral health workforce. An end goal should allow the reader to identify which providers can perform what service, for what need, in what region, and how close or far we are from reaching those goals. Next, the report should inform the legislature on who's prepared right now to enter the workforce. We need the employment department and boards to also help us with this work. Who we need today by practice type, basing it on the actual unmet need and not just simply taking a provider to population ratio approach. And then who will we need in 7 to 10 years to set a baseline and a target goal? My goal is to have a report where any legislator, any of us or any of our following legislators, would be able to identify a geographic region and clearly articulate what gaps exist, what the goal is, and use this as a resource to create strategies, whether policy or funding strategies, to meet that goal. Similarly, a legislative member should be able to take this report, identify a provider type of interest, where we need to be, and embark on a process, again, to identify strategies that can work toward our goal for that provider type. I hope I can have this committee's support for this, what I'm asking for, this report for HB 4031 amendment I just described. I believe it'll set us on a path to behavioral health workforce strategy that should serve us for years to come. And then if I might add, I too am very supportive of House Bill 4082, which is a Representative Greenlick's roadmap. I think I've had conversations with folks in the behavioral healthcare arena, and there's been some debate on whether this is necessary, whether this committee right here could do that work. And I think there has been some question on accountability and what is the group that holds us all together. And I think House Bill 4082 is actually going to be that group. It'll be a continuous path toward leading us again to something that's larger and bigger than any one committee could provide. But I'll let Representative Greenlick explain that bill, but I am in support of that.
Thank you. If you hang in a moment, I'll introduce 4082 and Senator Roblin will join us for a bit of testimony, then we'll come back to 4031.
There he is.
Senator Roblin just walked in.
If you join us, Senator Roblin, I'm going to very briefly introduce 4082. The thing that triggered 4082 was the sense that we don't really know where we're going for what would a perfect behavioral health system look like? And it led me to that, to feel that statement, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. The purpose of 4082 is to create a legislative response to how we move forward, both on the policy and on the fiscal side, to fit the kind of things that Representative Salinas just talked about, but to put that into the context of a larger vision of what a system could look like a decade a decade from now. There are questions that need to be answered both by the legislative branch, by the executive branch, and by the judicial branch. And 4082, the Behavioral Health Roadmap Commission, is intended to be the legislative response, since we have the ultimate responsibility in both policy and in fiscal. We'll hear some questions that need to be raised as it gets implemented about how it links to things like the Alcohol and Drug Commission and the governor's group on behavioral health. And those are all to be worked out. But what the Roadmap Commission would give us is a permanent structure inside the legislative branch that includes all the folks that are necessary for making those decisions. The policy shared, the fiscal shared, and links to both the executive and the judiciary. I'll stop there. We'll have more time to discuss it as we go through this morning. But right now, I'd like to invite Senator Robles to give his testimony so he can go back to his real job.
Thanks. For the record, Arnie Robles, State Senator, District 5, Coos Bay to Tillamook Bay. This has been an interesting interim for me in the sense that the Senate President decided that we needed to focus on mental health, and he decided to make a new committee and assign me as chair. He did talk to me beforehand to say if I would accept, and I said, of course, always interested in learning new things and being engaged. And this particular issue has a lot of personal ramifications in my life. So one, I have a brother who's bipolar who we spend a lot of time with trying to figure out a system in Washington and Oregon when he's traveling and doing things, and we have not been real successful in navigating that system on a regular basis. And he does very well for a period of time and then not so well for a period of time. And our family, my sister more than I, so she's the angel of the family. But actually before that, as a student at the University of Washington back in the late 60s, early 70s, Washington was going through a similar experience with state hospitals as Oregon was, and they decided to close a number of the mental hospitals for people and send them back to communities. And my mother was one of those people in the small town of Port Angeles who found herself on a board engaged in working with these people who were being sent to Port Angeles. And I was a student in college, and so I was drafted on the weekends when I came home to go to our local community college and work with a group of people who shocked me. It shocked me that they had capacities that I don't think were ever acknowledged when they were in the hospital. It shocked me that people who had, and that's why my mother got involved, all of the boys in our family are learning disabled. We all had trouble in schools with respect to learning, and a number of the people I met were no more severe than I was. Now, after 35 or 40 years in the hospital, they were much different than I was. And that was clear to me, helping an elderly, well, at the time I thought elderly, not so much anymore, a 50-year-old man write the first letter he'd ever written back to his parents, who were still alive, which was kind of remarkable, and then get a letter in response and read it to him and watch the emotional turmoil between that family, that this kind of thing was happening, and to watch a woman who ran the nursery at the state hospital, who was, I would call them institutionally retarded because of the situation she was put in, but she obviously had a lot of skills. It was clear to me and clear to my family that this was the wrong thing to do, and having organizations in communities to work with people and develop them in the family was really important. And so we worked on that a long time. My dad had a hard time with it because everybody at the facility knew my mom was part of it, so they'd walk by and visit all the time, and that frustrating him a little bit, but to the rest of us, it was a recognition that if we don't change something, other people could have that same situation. So fast forward, I get asked if I want to work on mental health, and a lot of that memory came back, and I realized, you know, we really haven't done justice in the preamble of the list when I read it, and I do recognize that, and I don't know if Sarah's going to testify, but I think there are some amendments and some conversations that are going to go on that I agree with, but it really struck the chord with me about my experience when I was a 19, 20-year-old person trying to figure out how to make sense of this world, and then recognizing that many of the people who live on our streets and are doing this, having a difficult time in life, we should be doing better as a society, recognizing that the first business that the state legislature took up was making a state hospital because mentally ill in early territorial still had problems. We have not figured out what that looks like. And this bill is about figuring that out. Getting smart people to start having conversations, to engage communities, and to really have a conversation about what should we be doing for people? How do we listen to all of the people involved? It's one of the conversations with my brother all the time. How do we listen? My son, debate in high school, had a case about solving for mental illness by making sure that we put aromatherapy in all of the city's vents so that if they were sleeping on the vent, they would get some care. I mean, it was a done-in spoof, but in reality, he was very angry about what he was reading in that whole year of debate on mental health, and he decided, let's have an interesting conversation, and they made it a lot farther than the coaches wanted them to, him and his partner. But it was an alert, and he talked to me about how bad it was at the time, and I was a high school principal at the time, not doing this work. And so, you know, time and time again throughout my life, I have been exposed to looking at this mental health thing, and I felt, in part, the reason I'm doing this, that I hadn't done my part in trying to help people. You need to listen to people. You need to figure out how to do that. I think we haven't done very well with civil commitment. There needs to be another kind of commitment out there that allows people, when they're in a particular space in their lives, to say, I really want this to help me. If I start going the other way, somebody can help me before the families lose everything and people lose everything. That's not helpful to people. You have to listen to them and hear them, and I think this is the way to start having that conversation in a real sense in Oregon, and I hope that people recognize that that's what we're really here about. It's not to say this group is right or that group is right or this group's wrong or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with how do we make sure that people are treated appropriately. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Are there any questions of this? Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining the party.
Yep, have a great meeting. I will look forward to helping as this bill moves forward. So,
Great. Well, this bill has a subsequent to Ways and Means.
I will help there as well. They did set me up with 6 or 7 committee memberships, so I'll have an opportunity someplace along the way to work on this bill. So.
This is your final payment.
Yeah, that's right. Final payments. Anyway, thank you very much.
Let's move back to 4031 and see if there are any questions of Representative Salinas.
Chair?
Please.
Oh, thank you, Chair Greenlick. It's not so much of a question, more of a comment. I remember when I read this bill, I was actually really interested in Section 1 from the consumer protection side of it. And so to hear that that's one of the things that is getting taken out is really kind of a sad thing, but I acknowledge and appreciate that you brought up how important it is to kind of have that conversation to make sure that we're in a place of where we're not capturing more professionals than we need to take out of that workforce. But at the same time, maybe working with people to figure out how to get them to a position of where they could be licensed, so that when people go to them, they're not paying for a service that they're actually not getting. So I appreciate hearing your commitment that you're going to move forward in the future with something similar after a longer conversation. So.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mitchell. Did I just hear you volunteer to help me with this work group?
Hey, that's a great idea.
We thought we had solved this problem a couple of years back. So I'm glad it's back on the agenda so we can get it, we can get it straight. Are there any other comments? Well, Mr. Administrator, would you call any witnesses we have if they're still interested, knowing that we're down to only section 2 of the bill?
Chair Green, I think your Vice Chair Hayden had a question or a comment.
Representative Hayden.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Representative Salinas.
I can see that.
105 pages here, and trying to roll through all this and kind of a lot of technical stuff as far as, over time, words that are appropriate, particularly in healthcare and other aspects, become replaced with other words. And then for about 20 or 30 years, those words get replaced with other words. And so a lot of that is rolling through that. But it seems like there's a lot of amendment and changes. You mentioned that, workforce is a big issue, but then we're restricting exemptions, or seems like the concept would actually reduce the availability of workforce with some of the licensing. And how do we balance that? So I'm just trying to get a grip on how do we improve workforce with less bodies. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
I'm trying to figure that out here.
Vice Chair Hayden, thank you for that question. So, and that is really why I'm removing section 1, which would have the negative consequence of removing people from the workforce. And so that is not my intention. It is to just make sure that people who should be licensed for family therapy to do so. But this was, I think, overly broad. So we do need to bring it back to kind of a work group. So am I hearing you right that you too want to volunteer for my work group?
It is a pleasure working with you.
Okay, and you are correct. There are lots of pages of technical amendments to do person first language, and so I did not want that to detract from the end goal, which is to kind of figure out how we get a real inventory and a roadmap moving forward on workforce itself. So we'll be removing all of that post section 3. So if you look at section 3, that is the beginning of the person first language, and then all those hundreds of pages after that really is that technical language. So I'll remove that as well, because this bill too, I think, will make its way over to Ways and Means, and I would not want our tri-chairs or anybody to be confused by all that technical language. So it'll just make it cleaner. And then, yeah, and you're right. It's, it could be replaced by something else later. The intent of that really was to reduce stigma for people who, would prefer not to be called a substance abuser or an alcoholic, those types of terms.
Yeah, I understand the argument behind that. Also, in medical profession, those words, when they're used, aren't meant with a stigma.
Right.
They aren't intended to create a stigma. They're meant more of as descriptive. But that's
right.
really not the question here. So, okay. And is Legislative Council here for this bill or for the?
For the 4082.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You can come back home now.
Thank you.
Chair Greenlick, we have Stefan Schostek, Michael Nagel, and Donna Ray, if you still want to testify based upon the amendment forthcoming. We have one more after this bill.
One person.
One person.
Chair Greenlick and representatives, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present my opposition to the changes proposed in the bill regarding Section 1 of the bill.
Please introduce yourself.
I certainly support the
Please
Section
introduce
2
yourself.
and 3.
Could you state your name, please?
Thank you. My name is Michael Nagel, and I'm an alternative therapist in private practice for 16 years in Portland, Oregon. I certainly support the goals of sections 2 and 3 of the proposed bill. I am against section 1, which would delete the protections that I enjoy as an alternative therapist. I also recognize that Representative Salinas has suggested that perhaps section 1 will be removed. However, I'd like to address the committee with regard to why I believe it should be removed. My credentials include the fact that I've been in practice for 16 years, and in addition to a baccalaureate degree, I spent another 7 years achieving a master's in psychology as well as proficiency in three different therapeutic modalities. I have articles written in or published in magazines, journals, also a peer-reviewed journal, and 2 books, and I've also authored 2 books. With regard to section 1, I want to emphatically emphasize that I support the goal of protecting the public safety. And instead, I would like to recommend that rather than removing the protections that safeguard my profession and that of my fellows, that instead we seek that very same goal by an alternative means, which I will speak to and my fellows will speak to also. In section 1 of the proposed bill, sections 675.825-4-A-B are to be removed, and those provide us the protections that I enjoy to practice as an alternative therapist. Removing them would allow the possibility that other boards in pursuit of their goals might perhaps ultimately seek to simply outlaw my profession. So rather than that, I would propose that the committee, the legislature, provide to alternative therapists the very same privileges of regulation that other licensed practitioners enjoy. I'm not against regulation. Actually, I'm asking you to regulate us rather than to remove the protections that might prohibit us from practicing in the future. Now, persons who might argue in favor of the bill and keeping section 1 might perhaps suggest that we are uneducated and perhaps a little bit more unethical than our fellow licensed practitioners. To suggest that we are perhaps not as ethical would ignore the fact that licensing boards meet monthly in order to regulate the ethical practices of their communities. We are neither more nor less ethical than our licensed practitioners. Regarding our lack of training, fellow practitioners sometimes spend tens of thousands of dollars and years in acquiring their particular practice or their particular expertise.
Can I ask you to wrap up your testimony?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I propose instead that I support Representative Salinas' suggestion that Section 1 be deleted. I support Sections 2 and 3, and I am certainly emphatically in support of public safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll follow on. Chairman Greenlick, members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you about alternative therapists and alternative therapy practice in Oregon. Like my colleague Michael said, I'm also emphatically in favor of
Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. I got ahead of myself. My name is Stephen Shostak. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm an alternative therapist in private practice in Portland. I also want to emphasize that I'm very much in favor of public and consumer protection for people that use services from alternative therapists. And I didn't want to come here today just to say no and oppose, but also to offer a constructive alternative for accomplishing that public protection. Other states also have alternative therapists, such as us practicing. And one state in particular that regulates alternative therapists pretty well is Vermont. They have a model that I've looked into and come to appreciate. and wonder if we might use it as a model in Oregon. Just a few highlights from that model. It provides the things you would expect for public protection: ethical, professional standards to live up to, a complaint and a disciplinary process. It provides one other thing that I found super interesting. It requires alternative therapists to write up a very clear and detailed disclosure about the modalities and the perspectives that they practice out of, something that the public could read and understand and know what kind of services they might be engaging. It also requires a lot of other disclosure about level of training, accomplishments, certifications, years of practice, and things like that. There's a lot of details involved in providing public protection, and I'll just stop there about the Vermont model and just say that we are very much interested in something like this in Oregon and eager to pursue it and take the next steps. And when I say we, I don't just mean a collection of private practice individual practitioners, but also some of the training institutes that exist in Oregon, and my colleague Donna will talk a little bit about those. There are training institutes in the state that are internationally recognized, that train therapists that eventually go all over the world, and some of whom practice in Oregon as alternative, and those institutes are interested in something like this as well. Maybe I'll just close by saying that we're looking for something that you could think of as aspirational, I think. Not only would it look out for protection for the consumer, but it would also call alternative therapists to a standard and hold them accountable to a standard. In that sense, I see it as something to aspire to. So a thing that would support good work and support therapists in continuing to improve their good work. I think good for the state, good for the people, and very good for the profession. I'll close there and invite Donna.
Thank you.
Do I have to? Oh, hi. I'm Donna Roy. I live in Portland. I'm a LPC and a certified Hakomi therapist and trainer. I have a practice in counseling and also consulting. I also teach in a training organization that I'm the co-director of called Mindful Experiential Therapy Approaches, META for short. And I'm the founder of an affordable clinic in Portland that serves the public and also works with graduate student interns as our staff. I've been in the field for about 20 years. It's a second career for me, so not my whole career. And I'm in sort of the mainstream and the alternative worlds in both areas. As Stephen and Michael have said, I'm not in favor of the way the Section 1 is described. I'm very, very happy to hear that Representative Salinas will be pulling it out. However, I agree that the idea is of regulating and supporting and clarifying and professionalizing alternative therapy in the state of Oregon is a very important one. As someone who has both and actually began in the alternative world and also included becoming a licensed professional counselor, I see the value of both. And I've worked and do work with people who serve folks who have both sorts of trainings. And I'd like to say something about that. In the work that we do and I do in Oregon with clinicians, I work both with folks who are licensed and seasoned and want to improve and add on to their particular skills. And I work with newer graduate interns who are getting out of grad school and need to do an internship and want to learn more skills. And also alternative therapists, counseling therapists who are hungry for support around skills and quality and ethical service giving. There are, just in Oregon, these are only 4, there are a number of institutions that do this sort of work. They include the Process Work Institute, based in Portland, which is all of these have international connections and multi-year rigorous training programs. The Hakomi Institute, which we are a local affiliate of, META is, it's another international organization. the Gestalt Training Center in Portland, Therapy Training Center, the Institute of Core Energetics. These all offer credentialing in their modalities, and these take, as has been said, they take a lot of time. I'm licensed in Oregon. That took me about 4 years by the time I did my graduate program and my licensure process. I'm also a certified Hakomi therapist and trainer, and that took me about 10. So there's a quality issue is not the problem generally. I would agree that people do need to have more support and more of a sense of professional acceptance in the field, and having a registry, as such as is happening in Vermont, and I think in Washington as well, there's another program, that would really help in that area.
Can I ask you to wrap up?
I'm sorry?
Can I ask you to wrap up your time?
Basically, I guess I would say that I would like to see us continue to allow alternative counselors and therapists to work. I would like to see us evolve and provide more support and regulation of these non-traditionally prepared and credentialed professionals, because they are professionals. I would not want us to prohibit the capacity to work in Oregon or the possibility of them being able to access the sorts of modalities that are not necessarily available in some of the mental health contexts that folks go to. And I would agree that professional regulation and accountability will really strengthen public trust and protection, and it would ensure unethical and harmful behavior can be reported and mitigated, and I think that's important. Thank you very much.
We have one more witness.
Yes, Mr. Chair. We have Carolyn Alexander. That's it for this panel, or for this bill.
Panel sponsors. We get 448.
No.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair and committee members, happy to be here today. My name is Carolyn Alexander, and I'm chair of the Board of Licensed Professional Counselors and Therapists. I'm currently a lawyer and an active member of the Oregon State Bar, but before that, I was one of the first licensees in 1990 after the original Practice Act for this board was enacted. I've been a lawyer now for 20 years, a second career. Most of those years were spent with the Oregon Department of Justice, representing agencies like this board. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 4031, Section 1 only. The board's neutral on all other sections. And I understand that the intent is to form work sessions and have a longer conversation about this particular exemption. And I'm very much in favor of that and looking forward to participating in that. But my goal here today is to explain very briefly and quickly how this statutory scheme works, how our Practice Act works, because I think there's some misconceptions here. So the board's original Practice Act, as I said, was enacted in 1989. There was an original exemption that was designed to grandfather in practitioners like myself at that time who had master's degrees and established counseling and therapy practice, but who may not have met, say, for example, supervision requirements at the time. So the original intent of the exemption was, again, to grandfather in established practitioners. That intent changed in 2009 with the current amendments and the current educational exemption in ORS 675 825 sub 4. At that point, 2009, most of the practitioners like myself who were grandfathered in were continually licensed or by then retired and no longer in the field. The exemption in 2009, as it's written today, was primarily designed to protect the jobs of alternative practitioners. But it doesn't account for the entire statutory scheme, our entire Practice Act. So along with that exemption amendment in 2009, the Act also defined, the amendments also defined professional counseling and marriage and family therapy as diagnosing, assessing, and treating mental disorders. So that's enacted now as 675, 607, sub 6A, and sub 7A for professional counselors and marriage and family therapists. So if a practitioner is not diagnosing, assessing, and treating mental disorders, the language of the statute, the board has no jurisdiction. So even without the exemption, the board's jurisdiction is self-limiting. So we're not interested in life coaches or parent trainers or hypnotherapists who are not diagnosing, assessing, and treating mental disorders. The original intent in 1989 of the Practice Act was to protect the public from practitioners who weren't adequately trained in those specialties, in treating people with serious mental illnesses. That was the intent. That intent has gotten lost along the way. So along with that, the board's authority and jurisdiction has been undercut. So while we wouldn't have a case against any of the practitioners who just testified, somebody with a high school education who is not informing their clients who are bipolar, severe depression, schizophrenic, that they're not adequately trained, are treating those folks. And the harm is real. So we've seen cases with sexual predators. We've seen cases with other kinds of sexual misconduct. We've seen alternative practitioners, and I use that word in the light of the statute, diagnosing, assessing, treating mental illnesses, who have caused clients' divorces.
Can I ask you to wrap up? We're
I
going
will,
to take
thank you.
this up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been on the board for 4 years, since 2016. I've seen 24 cases where the board had no jurisdiction, where there was serious public harm. That's what we need, is we need a statute that allows the board to have jurisdiction over those that we should have jurisdiction over, but still doesn't harm alternative practitioners. So I look forward to participating in work sessions, and I thank you for your time.
Representative Hayden.
Thank you, Chair Green. Just really quickly, you mentioned 24 cases outside of the licensure. How many cases did you have inside the licensure from 2016 for comparison?
Oh my goodness. You know, we're a very busy board in terms of the number of licensees that we have, including interns, as well as a handful of unlicensed cases. I don't have the answer for that, Representative Hayden. I can get that information to you, but it is in the hundreds. I can tell you that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Just follow up. If you could get that to a committee, what I'm trying to get to is there's going to be bad actors in every walk of life. Is there a disproportionately high amount? 24 doesn't seem like a high amount compared to hundreds, but I'm not sure what the end number or the basis that I'm comparing here. So if you get a comparison back, that would be helpful for me.
I will. And Representative Hayden and members of the committee, I do intend to submit written testimony, and I can include that in the written testimony if that would be helpful for you.
Thank you.
Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Greenlee.
Briefly.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say thank you to everyone who testified today. This bill, this section that we're discussing, reminds me a little bit about the dentist bill that many of us last year on Healthcare Committee had the opportunity to hear. In acknowledging that there were plenty of people who are very able to do this work, but making sure that people at least have an idea of exactly what qualifications are is important, and just commenting that I'm happy that we're going to continue this conversation, because we need to figure out a way of making that work out for everyone. So.
Thank you. I will close the public hearing on House Bill 4031 and ask Lori Friedman to brief us on 4082.
Chair Greenlick, Vice Chairs Hayden and Mitchell, members of the committee, Lori Freeman from Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'm here to just go over the provisions of House Bill 4082, which is a bill that creates a Behavioral Health Roadmap Commission. The commission is made up of various members from the Legislative Assembly, the chairpersons of the committees related to behavioral health, and the co-chairs of the Human Services Subcommittee of Joint Ways and Means. Also includes members appointed by the minority leaders of the House and of the Senate, and has currently constructed the director of the behavioral health programs administered by the Oregon Health Authority, OHA, although there is an amendment, a -1 amendment, that would change that to the director of OHA or the director's designee. That same amendment would also add the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. It also includes 12 non-legislative members who are selected by the Speaker in the House and the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. The main charges of the commission you'll find in Section 2, and Representative Greenlick already sort of summarized it, but basically subsection 1 to define the attributes of the ideal behavioral health system, 2 explicate or detail the elements of the behavioral health care system as it currently exists, sub 3, estimate the current expenditures by both government and private sources on behavioral health and the sources of funding for the expenditures. And then finally, analyze and identify the components of the behavioral health care system that must be added, reduced, increased, or modified during the next decade to move closer to the ideal behavioral health care system. So that essentially is creating the roadmap. Subsection 5 has the committee, as appropriate, modify their analysis, and then prior to each long session, so in each even-numbered year, to modify the findings so that the governor and the governor's policy agenda, the governor's budget, and also the legislature's policy agenda and the co-chair's budget, as well as any revenue proposals, could be developed, instructed by the analysis developed by the commission. That's basically it. The first year, the report is due by November 1st of 2020, and subsequent even-numbered years, the report is due in September.
Are there any questions?
Chair Green.
Representative Stark.
Representative Stark.
If I may, thank you, Chair Greenlick. Actually, on a previous question for Representative Hayden, I just pulled up numbers for him. In the 2019 budget presentation from the agency, they said out of 8,013 people that they oversee with license, 222 investigations occurred.
Thank you. You're on it.
Thank you, madam. We have some more testimony.
We do, Mr. Chair, we have Kevin Fitz and Jack Hychek, and then after that, we've got Steve Allen with the Oregon Health Authority.
Mitchell will go down and testify after this.
I go first since I'm supporting your. Oh, okay.
No, after.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Good. For the
Ready
record,
as we're gonna be.
I'm sorry.
We're as ready as we're going to be.
Very good, very good. My name is Kevin Fitz. For the record, I am a Oregon Health Plan consumer. I live on Social Security disability, and I was diagnosed first with schizophrenia at 19 years old. I'm 54 years old and still live with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I live in low-income housing. I'm a customer of Care Oregon. I've been in and out of Multnomah County jails and state hospitals and military hospitals and in shelters, et cetera, et cetera. I'm
You're
here
a fantastic advocate.
Thank you, thanks. I just want to say, and let me just add to that, I really appreciate particularly your leadership on consumer-based, grassroots sort of voice in our healthcare system. And I also want to give a shout out to Representative Tiffany Mitchell for her leadership on empowering other healthcare consumers with her gift and her support of folks like that. I'm here to say I support your Roadmap Commission 110%. I think it's a great idea. I spend a lot of time thinking of why can't we get the CCOs, the courts, the county mental health associations, and the consumers all in the same room with Pat and Steve Allen to talk about what's going on in our system and to learn from some of our historical mistakes and have a long, long, long road in front of us to sort of lay out what we want to do. So I'm 100% supportive of that, 110% supportive of that. The only thing I would like to suggest, and I'm not sure about the language, is a friendly amendment that we put in, submitted for exhibition, is the Oregon Health Authority has an administrative rule that says all behavioral health councils, committees, and boards that discuss behavioral health issues should have at least 20% mental health consumer representation on those councils, boards, committees under OHA and DHS. Of course, that does not apply to legislative activities or legislative work groups or even to the Governor's Behavioral Health Advisory Council, but as a principle and as a minimum, we think 20% of a group of this magnitude and this importance would help make sure that the grassroots voice of the consumer is heard. I just want to give you a point of view. If we put 49 people from industry in a room, they're going to tell you the problem is, Chair Greenlick, we need more meatloaf. Meatloaf being an analogy for the service they're giving now. We just need more money because we want to put more meatloaf on the plate for the customers. If you talk to me and if you talk to thousands of my friends who are customers, they'll say, it's not meatloaf that we're looking for. We want something that's innovative, something that changes the dial on this and helps us recover. We can build more hospital beds in Junction City, and you can fund as many secure residential treatment facilities, but you're ultimately going to have to send folks like me back to the community. And without a network and without hearing from customers who've been through the rough and tumble of the public mental health system and still live in that, I think this Roadmap Commission will miss the mark. So just a friendly suggested amendment, and I submitted it to you, Chair, and also to Chair Salinas of the Healthcare Committee. So thank you for hearing my remarks. I'm sorry if I went over.
Thank you, Kevin.
Good morning, Chair Greenlick, Vice Chair Hayden, committee members. I'm Dr. Jack Hotchuk, Yatsek Hotchuk, my formal ethnic name. I'm a retired psychologist, the director of Dynamic Changes LLS, a consultation group, and really speak from several role perspectives. One as a longtime clinician and program administrator in 5 states, including Oregon, also a family member of individuals with mental illness, and myself carrying a diagnosis of a serious mental illness. I also am proud to work with individuals like Kevin Fitz. I am here to support Kevin's recommendation for the amendment on the 20% consumer representation. My input will move from just the general concept or kind of a do-gooder perspective of it, wouldn't it be nice to include folks so that they can have their say, to a more practical and evidence-based practice foundation. In the past, let me just go back to the idea of effectiveness of organizations and mental health services is solely dependent on, and many years of research to show that no matter the modality of treatment or whatever, we're talking about trust and relationship. And that's what powers the environment for change to take place. That occurs not only on an individual basis like in therapy, it also occurs on any kind of a system basis. We have many examples of where individuals in the community do not trust the community mental health centers. Quite often that has to do with fear of being civilly committed or having long-term commitment, long-term hospitalization, not being able to get on with healing in their lives. Yesterday, at the beginning of the Senate session, Senator Mons Anderson emphasized the importance of relationship in all human endeavors, and that is central to this point that I'm making. For consumers, then, to be a central part of organizational and systems work to make them more effective has been borne out first in business organization and management research. Clearly, those organizations that utilize consumers to help guide them in terms of product and service design as well as evaluation are more successful, and we have much evidence in that arena, kind of along the lines of how many people will trust an organization where they hear that, oh, this is employee owned. This organization's employee owned. They're listening to the individuals providing the services who are listening to the consumers directly. Those organizations do quite well, and we trust them, and that's why we're drawn to them. Similarly, there's some research currently underway and showing preliminary results that in the area of mental health organizations, the very same thing holds true. The more we actually have consumer representation, particularly at certain decision points in the systems and organizations, the more effective are the services, the better the outcomes. And again, those are preliminary studies that are underway, but the data is already starting to be produced that just simulate what we know from other areas of business and organization. So consequently, I'm in support of Kevin's recommendation for an amendment to provide for 20% consumer representation. I think that in the interest of us using our tax dollars wisely and effectively, we would want to maximize what we know to improve the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Allen?
Chairs after?
Yeah. And my vice chairs are going to testify.
You want us to go down there?
I don't think after. Yeah, after.
Takes two of them to balance you, Steve.
Good morning, and for the record, my name is Steve Allenby. We're Health Director for the Oregon Health Authority. And good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. So this committee has heard me say that I think Oregon deserves a behavioral health system and more broadly a healthcare system in which services that people need are simple to access. And that those services that they access provide what they need and are tailored to who they are, the individual characteristics they have as individuals, and that those services are effective and they lead to meaningful change and improvements in people's health care and improvement in their lives and of those of the community. We have a ways to go to get to that place, and it will take a decade to do so. And what's attractive to me about this proposal is it creates a stable body to shepherd that work over time with the right people around the table. So it's a proposal that engages all three branches of government, so all are represented and all can influence the process itself. It engages in a collaborative way among all three branches. And it recognizes that it will take both policy and fiscal priorities. Workforce has to be attended to. We need to develop outcomes and data systems to get us to that improved system that we need. And should this commission be engaged, it will have the authority and the tools it needs to help drive towards that simple, responsive, and meaningful system that I think all Oregonians deserve. We have several concerns with this bill that I would like to articulate. One is there are existing bodies, including the Oregon Health Authority, the Oregon Health Policy Board, the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission, among others, and in its current form, this bill does not articulate how those various bodies will be engaged and the linkages among those various bodies of work, which I think will be important to ensure collaboration and coordination among the various groups working on behavioral health. It also doesn't currently address health equity, which we are quite concerned about in driving towards that ideal system at the Oregon Health Authority, and we believe that health equity is critically important in that and would encourage language that would highlight that issue. Diversity is also not currently articulated in the bill, and we think it's especially important to consider diversity in the composition of the commission as well as the role in tribal engagement. We believe, regardless of how this is staffed, that there will be increased workload from the Oregon Health Authority in providing data to this group to help inform smart policy choices. So we would look to consider how the work will be conducted and whether beyond data, whether it would be helpful for OHA to provide other staffing or support in policy development and data analysis. So depending on the vision for how that work gets done, we would like the opportunity to look at how that staffing would be addressed. And those are my formal remarks. Happy to take questions if there are them.
Those are great. We'll have some response and talk about that when we get into work session. But are there any questions of Mr. Allen now? Go for it. Steve, thank you very much for your help.
Thank you, Chair Greenlick and members.
One of the things I do want to comment on is one of the unique elements of this bill is it proposes that LPRO be the permanent staff for the commission. We set up the legislative policy and research office to do exactly this kind of activity for legislative function, and it's just beginning to grow into that function. We hope this will allow it to, I hope this will allow it to grow even more. But there clearly will be work for you to do, there's no question about that. And that'll all need to be figured out down in Ways and Means. This will be a real process. Okay?
Thank you, Chair and members.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, do you have your vice chairs?
Yeah, our team is here now.
Thank you, Chair Greenlick, Vice Chair Hayden, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tiffany Mitchell. I'm the Vice Chair of this committee and the State Representative for House District 32. I'd like to focus on contextualizing how this bill could impact the behavioral health paradigm in rural Oregon, where I think some of these problems are particularly acute in our availability and access of services. Over the past few months, I've been in touch with various people and organizations that provide and receive behavioral health services in the communities that I represent. One clear piece of feedback that I've had from people, especially those who have worked in other states, is that Oregon has a weak long-term direction, planning and goals relating to planning and goals that relate to behavioral health. This results in a patchwork of uncoordinated and unfunded services, which are ill-suited to meet the needs of those struggling with mental health disorders or suffering from substance use disorders. Additionally, private health insurance often does not reimburse for these services, or the reimbursement is incredibly low, which disincentivizes professionals from entering the field. I would also like to highlight that the impact this has had on veterans. I've been in touch with other veterans in my district, and the need is clearly there. And during the last legislative day session, I was able to help in getting the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs in here to do an informational hearing around the particularly different needs that even they have based on the culture and that that comes with service. I'm hoping that with this legislation, with bipartisan and bicameral support, that will be the first step in helping getting veterans involved in this change, so that we can help serve those in the communities that I represent, as well as in the entire state. In the urban parts of our state, a patchwork of nonprofits are able to fill some of the gaps in need, and in rural parts of the state, the patchwork often does not exist, or lack of access to state money to provide services that the state itself cannot provide is problematic. I fear that if our investments are not made with a clear vision of where we're going and what we hope to achieve, that we will be unable to meet the needs of people in our communities. To summarize all of these points, as Chair Greenlick has said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. There seems to be a universal agreement that the way we're doing things is not achieving what we would like. The problem is that there isn't actually clear agreement on what is actually wrong, what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right, because that really differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it's all also very highly individualistic. And if we knew what the current deficiencies were in the system, it wouldn't even be clear how we would